Hello, everyone. Daniel here from the Next Issue podcast. As you can see, I have a very special guest today. Comic book writer Ed Brisson is joining us today. We're going to be talking about Thundercats Lost, the upcoming series from Dynamite, and a whole bunch of other things. How are you doing, Ed?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, man. And how about yourself?
I'm doing great. That's great to hear. Thank you for coming in and talk to us.
No
I'm
problem.
very excited about the release of this series because the Thundercats renaissance that we've had over at Dynamite has been very exciting. Um, so I guess the first thing I want to ask is, can you tell us a little bit about Thundercats Lost and how this series kind of fits in into the whole larger world of the Thundercats?
Yeah, so Thundercats Lost is sort of like the title hints at. It's about a group of Thundercats who they knew that the sort of end of Thundera is coming. That it had been sort of prophesized across the Thundercats and the Chitara miniseries. And so, in advance of that happening, there's a group of Thundercats who are sent out to try and find a new home for Thunderians, and they're sent out. Probably it's several years in advance of when Lion-O and the rest of them in the Thundercats book is sent out. So this is actually kind of a prequel to the Thundercats book because we're sent out years in advance.
Okay.
They land on Third Earth, which they're hoping to make a home, and sort of are immediately set upon by residents of Third Earth. Third Earth, they find that most of the crew is wiped out, and they're kind of they're being hunted across the planet by by a warlord from there. And so this is the gist of the book is that they're trying to ensure the safety, the future of Thundera. They're trying to get word back to Thundera to warn them about what's happening. They have no idea that during the time that since they've left and now
Yeah.
Thundera isn't there anymore. As far as they know, Thundera still exists, and they're trying to save it. Um, they do have the Book of Omens with them, which is a sort of the thing that to ensure the future of the Thundercats. It's the book that contains the entire history of the Thundera and is sort of a blueprint for their future.
Yeah.
So, and the book stars for fans of the old series, the cartoon series, it stars the second season Thundercats that were brought in.
Oh, okay.
So you have Bengali, you've got Link, so you've got Chimera. We have two new characters that Rafa and I created for this series. Ligon, who's this sort of giant bruiser with a heart of gold, and we've got Nico, who is she's sort of she's a warrior, she's a soldier, she's tough, not a very pleasant personality most of the time. She's kind of like a nastier Wolverine almost.
Okay.
So the five of them are the last that's left of the crew. The crew was originally about 50 people who get wiped out. And that's a spoiler that basically happens in the first couple pages of the book.
Yeah.
And they're just trying to find their way across Third Earth. And like I said, trying to get word back to Thundera and just trying to survive in this strange new world.
Great. Going back and I watched Thundercats growing up. But I going back into the number one whenever it debuted the main series, I didn't remember about. There's so much there's so much stuff that happens with the time dilation while they're traveling, and of course Lionel like growing up while everybody else
Mm-hmm.
kind of stayed the same. So I found that like even though I was already somebody that had watched the series, like just that reveal again was pretty impactful. So were you a big Thundercats person? Like as you were kind of growing up, like was that one of your jams?
Yeah, it was. I was watching it as it was coming out back in the '80s. I was a latchkey kid. I'd come home from school and have the TV to myself for a couple hours, and after school, if I remember correctly, the order was like it was like GI Joe, Transformers, Thundercats, Silverhawks was sort of like this 2 hour block. And so yeah, I watched. I was a big Silverhawks and Thundercats fan growing up, and but same thing. It's funny because I'd watched them then, and I'd watched them I think once since, but Silverhawks especially was kind of hard to find for a while. But
Yeah.
Thundercats, I always actually had forgotten about that bit about Lino growing
Yeah.
during that period. I also forgot that the Thundercats are naked in the first episode,
Yeah.
which is
That's
so surreal to watch.
until they have their magical girl transformation, right? And they get
Yes.
their armors. That's a great block of cartoons, and funny enough, like in 2025, all those series have now ongoing comic books,
Yes.
uh,
Yeah.
which is
It's
great.
crazy to me.
I mean, you're writing Silverhawks as well,
Yes.
which like were you just like, I guess, how did these two series kind of come to be with Dynamite?
So with Thundercats Lost, Nate, who's the editor on all the Thundercats books, he contacted me. I want to say it was July or August. Um, July, I think it was. He contacted me to see if I had interest in writing Thundercats. And Thundercats Apex and Thundercats Lost were like offered sort of as one project, right? Like
Mhm.
uh, Apex was going to kind of set up some things that were happening in the main Thundercats book, but there's also going to be bits that would help us, uh, you know, jump off into the Lost series. So yeah, I was offered those back in July, but I had kind of been pestering Declan for a while about Silverhawks. As soon as he got Thundercats, I had messaged him to find out if Dynamite was planning to do a Silverhawks book because I was a pretty big Silverhawks
Yeah.
fan growing up. And I asked him a couple times, and actually, when Nate had first reached out to me to talk about doing something, my initial thought was like, "Oh, it's Silverhawks, right?" Like, and I was excited that it was Thundercats. But during that same call, I kind of pushed them on like if they had Silverhawks plans, what was going on, especially with like how well the Thundercats book did.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was hoping that it would just, you know, um, it just seemed to make sense to me that there would be a Silverhawks book at one point. But when I talked to him in July, he had said that there were no plans to do Silverhawks, but then called me about 2 or 3 days later and asked if they did a Silverhawks book, did I want to write it? Which is obviously yes. And I wrote a pitch for it, sort of a 10 issue outline for what I'd like to do with the series, and it got approved, and here we are.
So interesting. Did you already have kind of something in mind, like since you kind of were looking for that Silverhawks book?
Yeah, I had a few sort of ideas in mind. I really what one of the things I wanted to do was delve a little bit deeper into the characters because Silverhawks was like a great action show, but it was not
Yeah.
always great at like exploring who each of the characters were. They were just kind of
Yeah.
there. They just did their thing. They had their own quirks or whatever, but we never really get much history on the characters. We don't get much background other than like there's a 1 minute scene in I think the first episode where they're sort of recruited and we get like a real quick blurb about who each of them
Yeah.
is, but we don't get anything beyond that. And so I really was where my interest was kind of delving into that a little bit more and kind of getting into like why they became Silverhawks, like how they were each impacted by Monstar and his reign of terror. And I really wanted to build Monstar into, because in the cartoon Monstar is a space mobster,
Hmm.
but he does just kind of supervillain stuff. We don't get like real mobster stuff from him a lot, and so I wanted to lean into that. Like he's still a monster, he's still a terrible guy, but I wanted to lean into that sort of crime mobster type stuff a little bit more. And so yeah, I had all these kind of ideas stewing around, and just sat down and kind of wrote a story
Yeah.
around that, and why Monstar broke out of prison when he did. I wanted to delve more into like his and Stargazer's past. So there's a lot of ideas floating around that I was able to sort of lay out into a 10-issue story.
That's very cool. I when I was reading the first issue of Silverhawks, that one probably was one of the cartoons that I remember the least because, like you said, there's really just it was just a lot of action, not so much like here's the big hook or like these characters that you're gonna
Yeah,
remember forever. Other than the design of the characters themselves, right? I think that was probably the most iconic part. And when I opened the book and I started seeing the villains, I was like, oh, like I just immediately like jumped back to when I was watching those cartoons, and I'm like, I remember this, like I remember this guy, and I know this is the big bad, and things are about to like pop off because you spend in that first issue, you spend probably as much time with the villains as you do. I mean, really, the Silverhawks, you don't really see them until very close to the end, right? So we are. It's fun to
yeah. You
kind of
only see
approach the
one of
book.
them.
Yeah, you only see one of them, so it's kind of fun to approach the book as like, let me show you what they got to fight and why we need the Silverhawks, and that was
Yeah,
just a really fun approach to it.
yeah. I
Um,
wanted, and that's a big thing, is we wanted to spend a few issues bringing the team together. We didn't want to just show up with the team already there, and we do have. It's sort of hinted at in the cartoon a little bit, but we brought in like there's like an OG Silverhawks team that predates
yep,
them by like 100+ years, which are all like other than Condor and Stargazer, the other four are characters that George and I created together just for the book.
that's very cool. So speaking of creating characters, how much do you when you especially for Thundercats Lost, how much do you lean into like the cat theme when trying to name the characters? Or even just like if you're creating any new mutants or whatever other characters, like do you really spend time to make sure that it's like kind of a pun of the like they did in the cartoon?
I try. It's difficult. It's really hard because like the original cartoon basically went in and snatched up all the names.
Yeah.
Um, I did like Ligon is sort of a play on like he's a liger, right? So he's half
Yeah.
lion, half tiger, and so Ligon was a play on liger because there's two versions. You have ligers or you have tigons, depending who the mother and the father is in the
Right, right,
pairing.
right.
And so I literally just mashed the two words because I really wanted to feel like kind of uh, I wanted to feel like that sort of mashup, right?
Okay.
Um, and but when we were doing Nico, I did try, but there was just nothing that fit. There's nothing that worked really, because she's a snow leopard. I don't know. We tried a bunch of names, and then Nico was just so in the end was the one that we landed on, which was our second name. She was named something else for a little while, um, but we changed it. But yeah, I try because I'd like to keep that sort of fantasy going, but it's tough. We did that more, I think, in Silverhawks or the original team. They all have like bird themed names, which was me playing off of Condor, who was the only known member already.
Right, right.
So we just played off of that. But yeah, I try, but it's tough.
It is for sure. Like I was looking at the names and then I was like, who's already in the roster? So all right, I do also want to check in real quick. So, because at the end of the year in December, the Thundercats Apex one shot dropped,
Yes.
uh, and all throughout the book, I'm just wondering like who's under that thing, right? I think that's a big part of that book. But man, I did not know where that was going to go. And then now you say this is tied to both series, both the ongoing and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then your series as well. Uh, how soon will the repercussions of that book be felt right away in your book, or is that something that we're kind of have to wait a little bit?
You're gonna see some of the stuff in Lost, but like timing wise, the Lost team is there before Apex.
Okay.
So they're there earlier. So some of the stuff that it almost goes a reverse way. Some of the stuff you saw in Apex, you're going to kind of see how that came about or why in Lost.
That makes sense.
And then like as the series goes on, like Apex is going to be sort of a major player, I think, in the Thundercats universe over the next year. And so, I don't want to spoil anything, but as the series goes on, you'll see, his impact on I think both books.
Was the design something that Rafa came up on his own, or did you have something on the script like this is kind of what the feel is going
for Apex?
Yeah.
So Apex, it was it was the Thundercats team who did it, who came up with the thing already. Okay. But they didn't have. Hang on 1 second here. They did not have what was under the hood, basically. So
okay. Which is very jarring. Like it's very interesting when you get there.
So it's Drew and Declan came up with the design, I think, together.
Okay.
With the hood, the sort of sickle-like weapon and stuff.
Yeah.
And we were trying to figure out what it looked like under the hood, and I think there were a couple ideas, but the one thing that I wanted to we had talked about is that the gleaming red, and this is spoilers, I guess, for anyone who hasn't read Apex yet, was meant to be the Eye of Thundera. Like Apex had jammed the Eye of Thundera in there, and so I did like a really bad Photoshop. I took someone else's drawing of I guess we haven't said who's under there, so we won't spoil that bit for anyone who hasn't read it yet. But I took the character. There was already a drawing of the character under, and I photoshopped it to what I thought it looked like. So with the shaved head, with those like gnarly scars all over. And then I sent it off. I think Declan cleaned it up a little bit. My Photoshop, he did a version of it. And then Rafa did his own take on the scars. Like similar-ish, but mess around with them a little bit. So everyone's kind of fingerprints are on it. It's not
so cool.
It's a group effort.
That's what I kind of love about comics, is like so collaborative, even in like, because I assume you have to be talking to your editor and Declan, like just like because you guys are telling an overall complete story. I don't even know if like Sue Lee was involved in any of that, because the Chitara series, like how much of that conversation is, but I just love that part of it, which like there's a lot of people working to put like this whole project together and this whole world to bring it back to life.
We've been like it's been a fairly collaborative process, trying to like organize everything. There's a lot of stuff with Lost that Declan and I had to sort of plan out, even like stuff that's happening like a year out, just to make sure it makes sense and we're not stepping on each other's toes, and we can still like hang on to like big moments that we want to do in our books and not have them spoiled in others.
Amazing. Yeah, I can't wait. Usually, so as of the recording of this, like normally I get my emails from Dynamite on Wednesday, so hopefully I'll have this later on, so I can actually get into it. They're very good about, we appreciate them sharing those previews with us. So there's a few other series that you worked on that I want to talk to you about, because they're just like things that I just love. And let's start with Batman Incorporated. I guess I love that series just because it was so, I don't know, I just thought it was cool. Like it was like, this is just cool comics, right? Everything that happened on the series and the Joker Inc., like all that stuff kind of came about. So I got two questions for that. The first one is, how does it feel? Like Batman Incorporated is a big name, right? I think Grant Morrison and the team did like, they really kind of raised the bar on that. So how does it feel jumping into a book called Batman Incorporated? And then also how the book came about, like, is that something you pitched? Is that something DC came to you for? Like,
I'll do it in like reverse order here, but like how the book came about was that Ben Abernathy, who was the Batman editor at the time, had messaged me and asked me to write a Batman annual. And the setup was like, I think they were already kind of setting up a bit of Return of Batman Incorporated in the Batman book, if I
Yep.
recall.
Yep.
And so he wanted me to do a Batman annual, and the idea was that Batman was going to hand the reins off to
Ghostmaker.
Ghostmaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he was broke, and Ghostmaker was not. He had
Yeah.
plenty of money, and the rule was, Batman's rule is you can't kill, which is what Ghostmaker's got no problem doing. And so I got to, that was basically the assignment, was that, and so I got to sort of build the story around it. I got to sort of pick who was on the team. We decided to introduce a new character named Grey Wolf that came in that issue.
Yeah.
Which was pretty cool. It's great working with John Timms on that. And then the idea was that we were going to do the annual and then spin it off into Batman Incorporated, which is exactly what we did. And so it was kind of crazy because it was such a giant cast of characters to write. And I don't know how this happens, but like, if I could, if I had my way about it, I would write just like solo character books. But for some reason, I always get assigned team books. And I'm not sure why that is, but Batman Incorporated was a real tough one to write because I can't even remember how many people were on the team. I want to say it was like
I want to
6
say
or
like
7,
7.
and then
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, and then we added
Well, there's a few
Phantom
twists and
One,
turns
and
with
then
with
Black
characters.
Mist. Yeah, there was all these other characters on the other side. There was 5 or 6 characters on the other side. So it was like a giant cast, and so much to balance, and so much to make sure everyone gets their own moment.
And then to top it off, you're like, well, to close out this, we're just gonna also make as many Jokers
Yes,
on the other side. So
I mean the Joker Incorporated thing felt like a lot of fun because it was just like. It just felt like, if Batman has Batman Incorporated, it feels like Joker's going to do his own version
right,
of it.
like he always
And that
wants to
was kind of,
copy. Yeah.
yeah, and just like kind of own him in some way. But yeah, it was, I don't know, it was a lot of fun to write that. It was a lot of fun to come up with all these different sort of clowns who had been inspired by Joker.
Yeah.
The idea that he was kind of just using him as cannon fodder was a very Joker thing, which was a lot of fun to play around with as well. But as to like, following up Grant Morrison and that, that's one of those things that I think when you get into it, you just can't think about because it would just be crippling to sort of have to worry about sort of matching that level. But at the same time, I don't want to do anything that feels like it's trying to, like I'm trying to be Grant Morrison or anything. Like I want to do my own spin on it, do something that just John Timms and I, our own sort of spin, our own take on it, and not try and sort of replicate something that came before because we'll just fail. There's no way that we're gonna out Grant Morrison, right? Like it's a futile effort. So it's just a book that we just want to have fun with.
You say that, and then you're like, let me do a 2-part Professor Pig story in the middle of this book, which is like a Grant Morrison character.
I mean, but it's all like, I think you're keeping that same. There's almost like it fits, like that character fits within that whole thing, right? But yeah, Professor Pig is one of those guys that like I love a lot of Grant Morrison stuff. And I think that there's a lot of characters that they created that are a lot of fun, and Professor Pig being one. I'm a big horror film fan, so Professor Pig scratches a lot of those itches for me.
quick tangent since you mentioned you're a horror fan. Have you watched like The Monkey or any of the films that have come out recently, like horror films that kind of like got you real interested?
So I have not seen The Monkey yet. I'm trying to think of the last new horror film that I've seen that I really liked. I'm just gonna go on
Your letterbox? You got a letterbox?
my letterbox right now and see what I've
Yeah,
watched. Um, but Oz Perkins, who did Monkey, did Long Legs,
Long Legs.
which I liked the first 2/3 of Long Legs, and I hated the last act of Long Legs.
So
Um,
funny you say that. I haven't finished Long Legs because the Nick Cage character weirded me out too much, and I need to be in the right mindset to finish that film.
Fair
But I
enough.
agree. I think the beginning is very, very, very good. Um,
I watched Heretic recently. I watched The
oh
Substance
yeah,
recently. Substance is great, and then Revenge by the same director of Substance.
that's good
What else
stuff.
have I
Yeah,
got
yeah.
here?
Heretic was, man, what a trip. Um, hopefully people will find it now that it's on streaming. But um,
Yeah,
okay,
I think that I have watched a ton of horror lately for whatever reason. Smile 2, I actually watched fairly recently, which Smile 2 better than Smile 1. I wasn't so sold on the ending, but I thought it was a lot of fun.
great. Well, let me pivot a little bit. Where this isn't,
Yeah.
I guess it's not super horror, but I want to talk about your book from Boom Studios, The Displaced. I remember I picked that up because we get a previews from Boom, and I read the first issue, and I was like, I finished the book, and I was like, I need to know what happens next.
Uh-huh.
But there's just so many books out that when the second came out, I started picking them up, and then I didn't get to them till I believe when we set up the interview the first time. I was like, oh, this is my opportunity to make sure that I go back and read The Displaced. Uh, where did the idea for this book come from? Because it is such an interesting premise, and if you want to talk a little bit about the premise for those that haven't read the book.
Yeah, so the premise of the book is that the city of Oshawa, Ontario vanishes early morning hours one night, and all the people, nobody knows what happens. Like a giant sinkhole opens up, and it's like it just swallows the city, and nobody knows what happened to the city. It's a big sort of like international story. The only survivors from the city are people who like lived there who happen to be outside of town, for whatever reason when it happened. Um, and they sort of, they're brought together, sort of emergency triage sort of centers, and slowly what happens is this giant sinkhole starts to close, and the more it closes, the less people remember about Oshawa until it's closed and everyone forgets, the entire world forgets that Oshawa ever existed, that the people there were ever there. Like, so even family members, if they had people in Oshawa, they forget. They have no idea that they had family members. And the survivors realize that nobody can hold a memory of them either. And the only way for them to survive is to stick together, keep the memory of each other alive, because once they're separated, they're forgotten, they're gone. So it was it's an idea that had been kind of percolating for let's say that the series came out in 2024, and
Mhm.
I first came up with the idea in 2008,
Oh my god.
so a while ago. And part of the problem was like when I first came up with the idea, I didn't have an explanation as to like why Oshawa vanished, like what's going on, why this is happening. And then after a few years, I got to the point and I kind of realized that maybe it doesn't matter. Like I think the no explanation I could give would be satisfying
Mhm.
to anyone, myself included. And it's not really about how it happened. and it's more about the people and how we survive this new reality that has happened.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's this book is a weird one in that like 2008 I had the idea. I kind of worked on it for a while. I shelved it for a little bit. In 2010, 2011, I can't recall. I pitched it to a publisher. It was actually almost my first published work back in 2010, 2011. But the thing that the publisher that was interested, the thing we got sort of hung up on, the thing that we kept going back and forth on, is they wanted both like an explanation as to what happened, and they wanted a villain in the thing that was like
Okay.
kind of like pushing things. And we went back and forth, and there was several months, like almost 6 months, I think, of going back and forth. And they had notes, and eventually, like I it was early enough that I was kind of incorporating a bunch of their notes, but then I was really it became something else. No, I
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
into it. So we kind of mutually parted ways, and I just put it back in a drawer, which was tough because this would have been my first book. So to walk away from a thing that was going to be my first book,
Yeah.
my first non-self-published book, that is, was kind of tough. And then it just kind of sat in a drawer, and I would just pull it out every couple of years and fiddle around with it. And there was always, I thought there was like just kind of one thing missing from it. And then it just around 2022, it kind of all fell into place for me. And then I got in touch with Luca to pitch it. Boom, picked it up, and here we are. That's the 10-cent tour of the like 16-year history of getting that book.
I mean, it's like I said, it's a series that I really, really enjoyed. So how was it? So after all this time planning this book and trying to make it come together, what was it like seeing like maybe a few pages from Luca or like the designs of the characters and stuff like that?
It was great. It was interesting because like I said, I pitched this before, and at that time I was it was Johnny Christmas and I were doing it
Okay.
years
Okay.
in 2010. He and I did a book together called Sheltered, which we did
Yep.
a 15-issue series at Image. So it was interesting because there had been 6 pages. I think we had 6, 7 pages, maybe even 10 pages back then. And so there were characters, there were designs and stuff, but over that 13 years, things changed quite a bit. So to see it again and see how different it was from like my initial approach to it was really interesting. I think Luca is really great at like the big moments, like when you get that double page spread where the city's gone. It's just an incredible, but he's an incredible moment. But he's also really good at doing those quiet moments where it's just people sitting down and talking about their grief. Like there's that one scene, I think in the 3rd or 4th issue, where one of the characters is talking about her missing her daughter because her daughter and husband are gone.
Yep.
During the whole thing, and she's just talking about like missing when her daughter was a baby, like just the smell of her head, because babies have, if anyone's had a child, they know that babies, their heads have this smell.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's a pleasant smell, but it borders on being unpleasant at times, right? Like I just talking about this moment, like just this quiet moment of them talking about that, and her sort of breaking down over this memory of her own daughter. He handles those with just as much gumption as those giant double page spreads.
Yeah.
So he's an artist I really hope I get to work with again at some point.
I would love to also see that. I love the idea. Well, it's a scary idea, but like when nobody can remember you, like there's people that like, oh, I can do whatever, and then just go away.
Yeah.
And as long as I can get away clean with somebody with me, like they're gonna forget, right?
Yeah, and we obviously, that happens in the book. There's the one character, Tavis, who's just like, fuck it, I'm just gonna go hold up grocery stores and take the money, because as soon as I walk out the door, nobody knows who I am. But it is like, when you sit down and you really break it down, it would be like tough to survive because you can't get a bank account, you can't get a job, you have no legitimate means to access money, you cannot,
Right.
rent an apartment, you barely rent a hotel, and maybe if you have cash. But then the second you rent the room, they forget that you're in the room and can rent it out. So it's hard, right? It would be hard to survive, and that was really the really kind of fun exercise for me in writing that book, was just trying to figure out how you could get by, how you would get by.
Yeah, for sure. It's great. For anybody watching, if you haven't read this place, go check it out. It's really really fun. Well, fun may not be the correct word for it, but it's very entertaining. Because there's a lot.
I'm very proud of the book.
Yeah,
It's out in trade now, so you can just get the whole thing in
fantastic.
one go.
All right, I want to talk about. I had some questions planned, but I'm just going through, like, I made a list of all the things that all the series that just kind of really hit hard. So, New Mutants, from the Age of Krakoa was a really interesting thing because you were alternating with Jonathan Hickman, where he wrote the OG New Mutants, or and then you kind
Yeah,
of wrote
you're right.
like the next gen, like a different group that came later on in some of the other stories. So what was that like? How, like, as far as collaborating with Hickman and, like, just approaching this book?
Uh, Collaborating with Hickman was a weird one. It was like mostly uh, the plan that happened and what the original plan was changed quite a bit. So it
Okay.
was originally he was going to do an arc, and then I would come in after that arc and do my story, because it was going to be slightly different, my story, from what I ended up doing. But for me, like, I grew up with the New Mutants. I'm a huge New Mutants fan.
Yeah.
I love that original team. But I also, the thing I think that we miss about doing New Mutant stuff is the original concept, which was that this is supposed to be like a team that's learning their way, and they're the new kids on the block, or who are going to become X-Men, the New Mutants. I think was it from 82, so almost, I think we're
Yeah.
like 40 years of these kids being like the next X-Men. So I always, anytime I have a chance, I'd like to freshen up and bring through like a new class, right? Like they did that with Generation X in the 90s. Um, so that was my sort of approach, is I wanted to like kind of take in different characters, try and build up the team, try and have a second class maybe of these these kids. And I got to bring in a lot of my favorites, and Glob obviously was there.
Oh yeah.
um but yeah, so that was really it. I was just trying to push a new team, elevate some characters a little bit, and just do some fun stories.
And I think compared to some of the other work, like, this book really focuses on, like, the heart of the team. Like, all these characters, they're just so lovable. Like, I mean, at least to me, and maybe it depends on what kind of generation when you jumped on the X-Men, like which ones are the ones you like the most. But this group, like, it really feels like you never want anything bad to happen to them, right? So.
Right, 100%. And like, with a couple of the characters, like we brought in a new character named Cosmar,
Mhm.
who's a girl who's like this kind of dream, like was dream powered. And and we had Beak in it as well. And
Yeah.
I really like with that, and with Glob and such, is like really getting into like what it's like to be an outsider
Mhm.
in amongst a group of outsiders, because the mutants as a whole are outsiders, but there are some that appearance wise
Yeah.
can't, they can never hide who they are, and have to adjust to that. And that's what I really wanted to kind of drill down to uh, in that series, in the New Mutants.
Cool, very cool. All right, the last series I want to touch on of yours, and then we can start to kind of wind down. Uh, you wrote the last half of Old Man Logan, so after Jeff Lemire and Andres Sorrentino did their big 25 issues, you did a whole other 25 issues, pretty much. Um, what was that like? Because Old Man Logan feels to me like it was one of the craziest ideas that Marvel kind of had to bring in this character into the main continuity, but it just worked because I don't know, everybody loves Wolverine, I guess.
Yeah, it's fun because you're writing like just an older, crankier Wolverine, right? Like it's still Wolverine. It was great. It was it was, I think, one of the first um things that I think it was the second book I was offered when I started at Marvel. So I did a Bullseye miniseries
Hmm.
for 5 issues, and then I did Iron Fist, which was ongoing, which it was like 15 issues, I guess.
Right.
And then after Iron Fist, I was offered Old Man Logan, and being Canadian, obviously, uh, we're duty bound to love Wolverine. Um, and I don't. Wolverine's a character I grew up with. I love that character. It was always a favorite of mine as a kid. So being able uh, to take the character on and do those, we did 25 issues, and then we did an annual,
Hmm.
and then we did 12 issues of Dead Man Logan after that. So I got to not only write his story while he was in the Marvel Universe, but I got to sort of close his story out, like, and go back to the Wasteland and sort of
Yep.
bring his whole, bring the plane in for landing, bring the whole thing to a closure. Uh, was great because, I think the one thing that Old Man Logan has that maybe Wolverine doesn't as much. Wolverine has, experienced loss and such, but Old Man Logan, like, he lost his entire family, and
Yep.
he's still out there. He's got surrogate families with the X-Men. He's still got that thing where he's always taking somebody under his wing.
Yeah.
Because I was writing it, obviously he takes Glob under his wing. Um, but there was a lot of like really uh, there's a lot of like emotional meat there to kind of dig into with the loss of family, and
Mhm.
even the way that we wrapped up with Dead Man Logan, where he kind of returns and is sort of reunited with them, was like this. Was a real like nice emotional arc, I think, that he
Mhm.
had, and it felt, you don't often in comics get to close the story and feel like
Yeah.
that's it, and it felt like when at the end that we got to do that. As far as I know, they have not brought Old Man Logan back yet.
I don't think
And
so. Yeah.
fingers crossed he can stay gone for a while, and that ending can maintain its emotional
Yeah.
hooks.
Until Deadpool goes and digs him out or something.
Oh, Jesus Christ! Let's hope not.
uh yeah, I mean, I kind of love whenever you take over a book, or you start a book, like I feel like you try to go big because you started this with Maestro, like the
Right?
the
Yes.
series. Yeah, and I was like, oh my god, like this is how has no one, I don't know if they had done it before. I just don't remember having read anything like with Maestro and Old Man Logan, which I guess would make sense because Old Man Logan wasn't around for much stuff. But I was like,
Yeah.
why has no one done this before? Like they go back right to the first appearance of Wolverine. Hulk is there, so it would just make sense that all these years later they would still both kind of find each other somehow.
Yeah.
Um,
Agreed. And it was a funny one because like that was like the fact that it was Maestro was supposed to be like a last page reveal. Readers weren't supposed to know, but then they put Maestro on the cover
yeah,
of the book.
the cover, yeah.
Uh,
Who has not been spoiled by a cool cover or a variant
yeah,
cover or something like that, right?
it's
Um,
just so hard to, like, you write these moments and you're like, you want them to impact, right? You want them to have that sort of like, the reader turn the page and go, oh shit, and then like it's on the cover and they're not going to have that.
yeah. It also explains why later on we see Bullseye in the series as well, since that's a character that you had done in the miniseries before.
Yeah, I think I brought Bullseye in twice. I wrote two different things with Bullseye, and and Wolverine. But it's yeah, I really like Bullseye. It was like my first, like I said, miniseries that I wrote there. And I was kind of, when I wrote that first Bullseye miniseries, that was the first, like I'd done dribs and drabs at Marvel, but never a series, just like a one shot or a short story. So I think when I got that Bullseye miniseries, I remember one of the editors saying that if it sold like crazy, that we might get more than 5 issues. Like it might go 10 issues,
Yeah.
10 issues or whatever. And I was naive enough to think maybe this will happen. But like a 5 issue mini is just a 5 issue mini. There's never or very rarely an extension on that when you're talking about big 2 books.
Mm-hmm.
But I had all this like Bullseye stuff I still wanted to do. I hadn't gotten Bullseye out of my system, and that's why I brought him in a couple times there to Old Man Logan.
Well, I'm glad you got to tell more Bullseye stories. All right. As we kind of wind down, I want to ask: is there? I mean, I know sometimes comic creators don't have a lot of time to read other comics. But is there anything out there on the shelves right now that you're kind of into, or anything that you're picking up or looking forward to? Like,
So I am currently reading all of the Absolute stuff that DC's putting out.
DC? Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're all great. I've been reading the both all the GI Joe books and the Transformers books from Skybound. Reading the Deviant. I'm a little bit behind on my reading too. So I'm like several issues behind on a lot of stuff. I tend to let things collect and then I'll read them in 5 or 6 issues at a go. Or else I'll buy the trades if I'm really swamped. So that I'm not just leaving my my pull at my local comic shop full of single issues. On top of that, just read the new Brubaker and Phillips book, Houses Made on
Holly?
Holly,
Yep. Yeah.
which is great. I really loved Where the Body Was, which was the previous book.
They I love their stuff because it's like every 3 months I get a really nice one and done book from them.
Yeah,
And it's like I get my crime fix. Right? So
yeah, I a big fan of their stuff. And then I just picked up. I don't read a lot of manga, but I just picked up Chainsaw Man, the first volume. So I'm about to
okay.
dive into that. We'll see how that is. The design on that character is so ludicrous that I'm in love with it. So I'm hoping that the book matches the energy of the design. And beyond that, I don't know. Like I'm getting stuff all the time on my pull list, but those are the standouts at the moment. I'm just looking over here on my shelf to try and see if there's something that pops up.
Sure.
But
No, like yeah, it's there's I feel like we're in a very good time for comic books. Like there's so many, like whether you want to go, big superhero stuff, whether you want to go like creator own or like more indie publishers, or like all these franchises like Thundercats that are coming back and having a second life. Well, I guess Thundercats has had multiple iterations, especially like there's been so many animated series, but like this feels like we're going back to the original and kind of retelling more of their stories, right? Or continuing
yeah,
that stuff. So it's very very exciting stuff. I hope people are watching this and like they just know that they gotta go pick it up at the shop. It'll be on sale on March 19th at your comic shops from Dynamite. Is there anything else, any other projects that you want to announce or talk about? Well, not announce, but like any other projects that
yeah.
you coming? Yeah,
Well, I do have like
any breaking
I
news you want
think
to drop here?
on the 19th, I think Silverhawks 2 is at that time. So if you haven't read the first Silverhawks, go out and grab that and get yourself caught up. I have so I have 2 books that are pretty much done that haven't been announced yet. So
Okay.
I think one of them is going to be announced in the next few weeks. And it's a creator owned. It's me returning to just doing straight crime.
Oh,
So that should be announced in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So keep an eye out for that. And then I have another book that is going to come out as a trade rather than single issues. that is a crime uh, against a backdrop of like late 60s, early 70s Hollywood, like the new Hollywood era. If
Okay.
anyone's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a big film fan, so the where like Scorsese and Paul Schrader and Francis Ford Coppola and all those guys kind of like came out of. Um, that and like again, I'm a horror film fan, so there's a bit of like Roger Corman, Herschel Gordon Lewis sort of stuff in the background, and it's not about all those filmmakers. It is about a filmmaker during that era who gets himself embroiled in a pretty messy crime scenario. So yeah, that book is being announced soon as well. The one I was just talking about, and then I just signed a deal, a contract on a new horror book that I'll be doing that I think will be out later this year. Another creator on it's just straight horror, something I've been sort of developing for the past few years. Pretty excited about. I'm working on it with Damien Cazzaro, who I have worked on a bunch of stuff with. He did Cluster. We worked on Cluster at Boom. He did a few issues of Iron Fist when I was writing that, and I don't know. We've done a ton of stuff. He and I think he's the artist I've worked with more than anyone else over the last. Like we were pitching and doing some self-published stuff almost 20 years ago. So he's going to be the artist on this horror book. He's actually the artist on one of the crime things I was talking about as well. So pretty excited to get both of those things announced and out there.
Excellent, excellent. Last thing, is there any conventions that you might be at soon so people can go tell you how cool your books are?
Yeah. So if you're in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is where I live, there is a show called Back Issue Con. It's a smaller local show that I'll be at in April. It's run by a friend of mine. And then in June, I'm going to be, I don't think it's been announced. I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about it. I'll do it anyway. I don't think it's going to surprise anyone because I'm there every year. There's a show called East Coast Comic Expo, ECCE. That's in Moncton, New Brunswick. I'm going to be there. And in August, assuming Canadian-American relations don't continue to deteriorate at the rate that they are right now, I'll be in Connecticut in August for Terrificon at
Awesome.
Mohegan Sun. And that is all that I have sort of confirmed. There's a couple others that may be coming up a little later in the year, but those are the confirmed shows right now.
Awesome. Well, Ed, thank you very much. Thank you for letting me geek out over a lot of these books.
Oh, thanks for having me, man.
And reminiscing on some of that. Once again, make sure to go pick up Thundercats Lost. #1, make sure to pick up Silverhawks 1 and 2, which will be out by March 19th as well. And then just all the other stuff we talked about. Like, Ed has so many cool books. So thank you very much. If you're watching this, make sure to share, like, subscribe, leave us a comment, leave some questions for Ed. Maybe he'll come back and answer in the comments. I don't know. I'm not making him do that. But yeah, thank you very much, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.